Don't ever let somebody tell you you can't do something.
Wait a minute, you ain't heard nothing yet.
You're listening to the Live to Create podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the official Live to Create podcast, coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee. I am your host, Shane Almgren, and I am joined today from California by #1 New York Times best-selling author Carol Kline. Carol has been an author, editor, and ghostwriter for more than 20 years. She has co-authored numerous bestsellers such as Happy for No Reason and 5 books in the Chicken Soup for the Soul series. Her books have sold over 5 million copies and have been translated into 30 languages. Carol, thank you so much for joining me today. It is an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you.
So I'm very curious, and when I say prolific, you've written or published how many books now?
I have written and published 13 books. And I wrote 6 of the Chicken Soup for the Soul books in the series, and then a few other collections of stories, and then 3 self-help books, plus one that's still coming out. It just came out like a few days ago. And it was, again, the stories that I've written, the books that I've written have been varied in that they sort of led one to the other in my career. You never know what's going to happen. You start one thing and you never know where you're going to come out the other side. So I started reading as a child. I didn't even study writing. And then it led me to a career of writing stories and ghostwriting, and then actually becoming a self-help author.
So we skipped from childhood reading to self-help author. I think there was probably some stepping stones in there.
There were definitely some stepping stones. Well, I was that kid. I mean, I was a voracious reader. I read everything. I read when I was a child. I was that kid that had the wagon, and I took it to the library and I filled it with books, and then I dragged it home and I laid on the couch and I read all the time. I loved reading. I loved escaping. I loved character development. I loved what happened next. Fiction. And I wasn't a big nonfiction reader, which is kind of funny. And then, I studied literature in college. And, of course, that's such a practical thing to study.
Did you know when you went for literature what you were going to do?
Not at all. It was what I was interested in. And what I was interested in terms of literature, was I loved contextual criticism. I loved to find out what this story meant. Like when this book was written, when we did history, historical literature, when we read literature from different eras and different parts of the world. And I loved understanding what birthed to this, what was the reason this book was written, and what was the effect of it. I like it sort of as almost a sociological piece. So I loved the whole written communication world, and I thought it was amazing. There's a Carl Sagan quote that I really love about how reading allows us to enter somebody else's consciousness anywhere in time and anywhere in space. And it's just this amazing thing about being human, about somebody else's experience of being human. We're all sort of stuck in our own heads, our own experience of the world, and you get to step out of that and understand somebody else's. And I think movies do that too, even more viscerally.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I love books. But what I realized was that I didn't think I could write anything. I never thought I even would try. I just love the experience of studying somebody else's ideas and descriptions and worldview. So, fast forward, I go to college, I get a degree. It doesn't prepare me for anything.
Of course.
Real world. So I was always very entrepreneurial. I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. I'm sort of unemployable. I don't like having to show up at a certain time. I mean, I'll work as hard as anybody, but I like to do it on my own terms. So it prepared me for a life of quick-witted, jack-of-all-trades, Renaissance woman kind of life. And I did all kinds of fun stuff. And always the closest I came to writing was one of my careers was I bought and sold Amish quilts and dolls. So I traveled around the U.S. and Canada, and I went to Amish communities, and I would try and find antique quilts that they weren't using anymore. It was fabulous because they wanted the new, easier to take care of ones. And these quilts were like works of art. And I fell into another world. It was like going back in time, and I wanted to write about it. And I remember trying to write and thinking, I just can't capture this experience. And kind of giving up. I think I probably have that start of that story somewhere. And then somebody, of course, anytime you have an idea, that was sort of the time when Sue Bender, I think her name was, wrote a book about plain life or simple life or something, and it was her experience with the Amish. So I figured, okay, somebody who's written that book already, I'll just forget about that. But, and so I didn't write at all. I read, I listened to books on tape. And then Marci Shimoff, who is a good friend of mine and also my co-author on many of my books, this was before our books, she invited me to meet Jack Canfield. We went to a course with Jack Canfield in 1990. I had just been a new stepmother, and I was afraid I was going to ruin my stepkids, so I wanted to learn about self-esteem. So I went it was a 10-day course in California. I was living in Iowa at the time. And I fell in love with Jack's work, and it was so remarkable. I came back just really transformed and really jacked up and excited about, the potential that you could help children. Self-esteem has a really bad rap. It's people get mad because it's sort of too much about ego and making kids feel good about themselves. And this is more about respecting themselves and respecting others and treating themselves with inner coach rather than inner critic. It's not about every child, getting a trophy for showing up. It's a misinterpretation. So anyway, I was very excited about Jack's work. And so I went back year after year, 90, 91, 92, and I took a course, and then I was on the facilitating staff, and then he came out with Chicken Soup for the Soul. And I remember all of us going, wow, that's a really weird title. We kind of rolled our eyes privately, but we said, sure, that sounds great. We were all excited for him. And then Marci Shimoff, my co-author, my friend, she was one of the first people to come up with the idea for those niche books, Chicken Soup for the Woman's Soul. So I ended up doing research for her because that was the thing I thought I wanted to be, was a research librarian, because I'm a detective as well. So my love of books and reading. Anyway.
Are you Nancy Drew with books?
I'm Nancy Drew, exactly. Yes. I love sleuthing. I love research. I love finding out things. So she asked me to research stories for Chicken Soup for the Woman's Soul, finding inspirational stories. And then I ended up interviewing those people, and I found I had a talent for writing in other people's voices. I could write a story. And what was really strange is I'm a meditator. I've been a meditator since I was 15 years old. I meditate twice a day on the average. And I would sit to meditate, and the first line of each of these stories that I was researching would come to me, and it was just really cool. And it was really moving and very exciting. I felt like a funnel for creativity. And I'd write it down, and then the story would sort of flow from there. And I remember, I didn't know how to write it first, and I was floundering a bit. But when someone I could interview them and just sort of follow the thread, and I would flesh out the details that I thought would really make the story sing and make the story land, because I knew what landed as a reader. Mm-hmm. I knew what details really spoke to me as a reader. So I looked for those same details in my interviews to include in my stories. And it was a great experience. So there I was, writing stories for Marci, and Marci was, out there creating Chicken Soup for the Woman's Soul. And I realized, you know what? I want to be a co-author. I don't want to just be someone writing the stories. I want to be someone who directs the stories and who's, looking for the right story and then putting the book together. I really wanted to be more involved. So I became involved with Chicken Soup for the Pet Lover's Soul. I was really lucky enough to become a co-author on that book. And that's a fun story. Probably not about creativity, but about standing up for yourself and negotiating.
Well, tell us that. We want to be empowered. We want to be empowered as well.
Well, it was an interesting story in that, actually, as anybody who's listening to this who is a writer or a musician or anything that's creative, usually don't have good business sense. I've seen that a lot. That most people don't stand up for themselves. They aren't good at sales or marketing. They aren't good about the business side of being an artist. being a creative person. And a lot of people, that's tragic because they don't make enough money to be able to allow them to give their gifts of creativity. They have to do it sort of on the side after they've worked all day and given their best time and energy to something else. So this could be helpful. It was basically about, I was introduced to the co-author of Chicken Soup for the Pet Lover's Soul. He was already had a contract with Jack and Mark. And, I told him I had this thought that I really wanted to be a co-author, but that was a big deal. That was a royalty position. It wasn't just an hourly wage. It was a writer for hire, which is what I'd been doing before that, where you just got paid by the story or by the word or by the, you weren't really an owner,
right.
You weren't getting a profit share. And so this man had sent me a box of stories that he had collected, and they were, as an animal lover, I was a pet parent. I'd never done any animal rescue work, but I loved my pets, my dogs. And so reading these stories was I got cheers, and I got chills, and I wanted to stand up and cheer, and I got tears and a lump in my throat. It was all these very visceral responses to these stories, and I knew after having helped Marci with her books that these were absolutely killer stories. So when the man called, the co-author, I told him I had good news and bad news, and the good news was the stories were amazing, and it was going to be an amazing book. And the bad news was I really didn't want to do it unless I was a co-author. And he said, no, well, I don't want, that's not the position I called to talk to you about. And I said, I understand, and I understand if you don't want to do it. And I needed the money. I really needed the, hourly wage. But I said to myself, if I take that hourly wage, nothing will ever change in my life. So I was willing to walk away. And I said to him, I really understand. I'm not going to do it. You need me. I know how to write these stories. I've written them. I can write this book for you, but I have to be an editor. I have to be a co-author and not an editor. And he was like, forget it. But when I said I wasn't going to do it any other way, and I told him what I could bring to the project, we ended up negotiating. And it changed my life. I became a Chicken Soup for the Soul co-author, and it was one of the most wonderful experiences. I got to just curate. That's what you do as a Chicken Soup for the Soul co-author. You're curating the book. You're curating. You're picking the pieces that fit together to create an experience for the reader.
This is a great time to interject. I'd like you to answer this. I'm curious how a co-authorship actually works, like what the workflow is. When we co-write songs, 4 of us or 2 of us or however many go sit in a circle in a room, and everyone kind of spits out lyrics and everyone pencils them in on a book. What does that workflow look like?
It's very different in every book. It's different for what type of book you're doing. I don't think too many people co-author fiction, and I'm not really a fiction writer, so I'm going to excuse myself from that discussion. But, when you're doing Chicken Soup for the Soul books, it was a very specific collaboration, and depending on, I've done 6 of them, and it was different for every book, depending on what the other co-authors brought. Jack and Mark basically were the overseers of everything, and when we were finished, we had to, the stories had to run by them, and they helped put the book in order for the niche books. They were the ones that started the whole series with their Chicken Soup for the Soul, and then Second Helping, and Third Bowl or whatever. And they were basically motivational speaker stories. And then when they branched out to these sort of niche books, where what stories would feed a woman's soul, what story would feed a pet lover's soul, what story would spark, rekindle the spirit and open the heart of a woman versus a golfer versus a gardener, So each book I did 4 animal books, 1 mother's soul book, and 1 veteran's soul book. And in each of those, my co-author duties was different. In each of them, my co-author duty was different. And I find that it's really a matter of whose strengths you want to take everybody's strengths and play to them. So with Chicken Soup for the Soul books, when I was working with Marty Becker, who is one of the world's experts on the human-animal bond, and he travels, and he's a great writer himself, but he was really, his role in the book was to solicit stories to the syndicated column that he had, and he spoke at every animal school, any veterinary school in the world. He was traveling like 200 days a year. And so he would leave a flyer on each share, saying we're looking for stories that will, open the hearts and rekindle the spirits of pet lovers around the world. So he was, opening the floodgates, and then we had a reader, and there were obvious no stories, but the maybes and the yeses I would read, and I'd look for the spark. I'd look for some potential there. Very few stories came ready to go. There would be editing involved, or I would actually call and interview the person and rewrite the story for them as a ghostwriter. So I had all the writing and duties in that, and then he wrote his own stories, and he would review stories, he would edit stories. So I was the first draft writer. I was the person that took it from zero to rough draft, first draft, and then we would collaborate after that. So it's different. And then in some of the books, like Happy for No Reason and Love for No Reason, I like to say that Marci Shimoff and I, we were like, we both had keys to a safe deposit box. We couldn't do it without each other. We brainstormed, and then I would write. I was the first draft writer, pretty much, and that's what writers do. Mm-hmm. Marci's skill, she's an amazing communicator, and she's an amazing editor, and she writes beautifully, but her gift isn't in writing first drafts. That is a synthesis, and I actually thought if I ever went back to writing what I did before, if I had a website, it would say Carol Kline, word handler, sentence tamer, concept wrangler. Because that's what I felt I did. I was just like, I was wrestling with, and I like to tell people this when they're trying to write, you live in a right brain world, and your gestalt is nonverbal. Your experience of life, and to try and put that into language can be daunting, and it requires practice. You need actually to lay down cable between your left brain and your right brain, and your right brain processes the heart experience. As I said, your gestalt, your sort of nonverbal experience. So that requires practice. And the other thing that people have to know is you have to just be aware of that, and not be too hard on yourself when you can't capture a feeling or an insight that's so subtle in words, because you're drawing it up from a very deep, silent well inside, and it doesn't have words often. It's not verbal until you try and communicate to someone else. It just lives in you. And so oftentimes people get very discouraged because they can't write as well as they can experience. And I love Ira Glass has the most fabulous quote in This American Life, and he talks about how if you just write on writing, he says beginners is what gets us into our art is our taste. We know what we admire, and we love good music, art, writing, fill in the blank. But when we try and start doing it, our taste outstrips our skills. We don't have, in the beginning, the talent or the skill to write up to what we know is good, to our standard. And so many people quit because they think they aren't good enough. But he says, I wish someone had told me. It can take a few years to hone your craft, and you have to just write badly until you write well and not worry about it. So that was that learning curve of, and it can be a lifelong learning curve. I think that if you really focus on it in a concerted way, on a daily way, that writing, I did it for years, like 10 years. I wrote almost 10 hours a day, on average 10 to 15 hours a day when there were publishers.
That was going to be one of my questions.
Yeah, I definitely went over the 10,000 hours that Malcolm Gladwell talks about easily. And it became I really laid down that cable. And I tell you, it goes away if you don't do it. It's muscle memory eventually. I think if I wanted to write again at that level, I could do it again. But it does take a toll on your body, because when you're sitting that still and being so cerebral, I don't recommend it. It's not a healthy thing, but it's an exciting thing to live this sort of, I would feel like a blue flame inside my head. It was just so, engrossing and so exciting to synthesize my experience and express it so that other people could experience the same thing, or I could take abstract concepts, and my favorite thing is to take sort of more esoteric things and make them so common and easy to understand. So there's a Yiddish word called Hamish, and it means like home, down home, or something that everybody understands. So it was my goal to take, sort of complicated things and make them elegant and simple. And I love Einstein's quote. It says that if you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it well enough.
And he was an intelligent guy.
I would say so. And being intelligent, it really takes a genius to make something simple.
So I'm curious for you, because a lot of people that end up writers, they know they want to be a writer. They go to school for journalism or, whatever. You went for literature not knowing that you wanted to write, and then you end up with other published authors, and you're the go-to, the first draft writer because you're the best word wrangler here. Mm-hmm. Do you remember the first thing that you wrote where you realized, oh, hey, I might actually be really good at this?
Well, it was these stories I wrote for Chicken Soup for the Woman's Soul. One of my absolute favorite stories. But the thing was, when you write stories, somebody else's story, I didn't think I was a good writer. I thought I was a good channeler. I was a good ghostwriter. Because I didn't have to come up with plots. I didn't have to come up with... I was really good at listening to someone's story and taking down the parts that moved it along and honing in and amplifying the pieces that moved you emotionally. So the story had to move along, in terms of pacing, but there was also, I was really good at just doing this. Chicken Soup stories, they can be very formulaic, and people can think of them as cheesy if you're a literary person like I was, but they're absolutely kind of a beautiful way to learn how to write a story that actually shows and doesn't tell, that's not heady, that actually has visceral, I could tell a story worked in Chicken Soup when it either made me cry, laugh, get goosebumps, or just feel exalted, and those were like a sort of a lifting of the heart. And those are visceral experiences, and that's just, you're just reading, and somehow it's creating an experience in you. And I really learned, I think the best way to learn how to write is to write Chicken Soup stories well, because they can be horrible. They can be so petty, just someone talking and not really showing the... If you had to, what's the word? If you had to make a film of one of these stories, the better ones will have action. The worst ones will be a talking head, just sort of, and then I felt, and then I saw, but the real good stories will be, they'll just move along with, they're grounded in physical reality. There's something would be happening on the screen. You would see something happening. And the worst ones are like, I realized, or then I knew. And it's just so internal. And it's not easy to translate that to somebody else's experience. If you can give them the same experience you had that catalyzed your realization or catalyzed your emotion, then you've been successful as a writer. So when I started writing Chicken Soup for the Soul stories in Marci's book, this was in 1995 or 4 or 3 or something. It was like 5 or 4. And I would read them and I would get moved by them, and it felt like, wow, and I'd send them to Marci, and she'd be like, these are amazing. So that's when I sort of thought, okay, I can definitely ghostwrite. I can definitely, take someone's story, because the difference between, if you look at security cameras, that's not very compelling. It's not like going to a movie. So real life or real-time life isn't necessarily compelling. You have to curate, again, that word. You have to curate what's compelling and sort of condense time and condense action to what really is going to tell the story you want to tell.
That's a perfect tie-in. I'd seen an advertisement for a speech or a talk or a keynote that you were given. It was quite a while back, and there were 3 key points that you were going to be examining. The first was putting your deepest wisdom into words. The second was engaging your readers on your very first page. And the third one was what you just said, making your stories clear and compelling. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about each of those points a little bit more?
Yes, I think I've already talked a little bit about, bringing sort of translating the wisdom onto the page. That requires practice. And I like to recommend that people start doing a laying down cable exercise daily. And laying down cable exercise is I used to say the ineffable is effing hard to write about. It's like it's the ineffable things are things that are not easily put into words, and you have to learn just by practice. And just sit down in the morning, ask yourself a question before you go to bed at night. That's a really great way if you can write in the morning, or ask yourself a question in the morning and then let it process during the day, and when you come home from work or before you go to bed sometime, just go to your computer or go longhand and just keep writing. Keep your hand moving, keep your fingers going across the keys. What I would do is I'd ask myself a question at night, and sometimes the questions were, really, what is happiness? When I was writing Happy for No Reason, or, what is grace? What is, I would just ask these questions like, what does love mean to people, or what would it be like to live with an open heart? I would just ask these sort of abstract questions of myself. And I'd go to sleep and let my subconscious work on it, and then I would wake up in the morning and literally just jump out of bed and run to my computer because I could feel that something had processed. And I would just start like putting my hands on the keys, X's and O's, and just nonsense, and all of a sudden words would start coming. And I would harvest, most of it was gibberish and, not good. But there would be gems in there. Something from very deep inside of me would come to the surface. And it, who knows where that came from. You take in so much more information than you process. Our minds take in thousands and thousands and thousands, and our senses take in, just in a mind-boggling amount of information. And yet we only really process what we could handle is a fraction of that. So there is stuff that gets sort of brought into you that you don't process consciously. And it's just there. And so sometimes when you ask yourself that question and just let it go, something very deep and very very profound can come up, because it's not going through the filter of what you think you know or what you agree with. It's not coming from that place of intellect which says yes and no, yes and no. It's coming from some deeper place. So I would harvest maybe 4 sentences from a morning writing session of 15 minutes or half an hour. And then I would get up and walk my dogs and, meditate and drink water and whatever, And then I go back to writing again. But writing again the second time was not like that. That was when I had outlines and I was, I wasn't writing from inspiration. I was writing because I had to get a book done. So this was a chance. So I really recommend that if people want to learn to connect their nonverbal wisdom to the written word, they start practicing that. And it'll be horrible. It'll sound trite. It'll be blah, blah, blah. But be patient with it and learn to create that conduit for it. And if you want it and you want it badly enough, it will happen, because that's the nature of human brain. It's very plastic. It will do what you want it to do eventually if you keep giving it the same instruction over and over. And then that does lead into the second point that we were talking about, how to engage the reader immediately, and that is with story, because we are our limbic brain is just wired to want to know. It's the emotional brain. It wants to know what happens and how do people feel. And stories engage people. When you open a book and there's a story in the first page, if someone's writing a book or a story or a speech, the very last thing you want to do is engage someone's intellect right away. Because an intellect will be yes, no, I know this, and you don't get anywhere with that. People, if they don't agree with you, they'll just turn away. But if you start with a story, people always want to know what happens, and it engages them on a level that is much more compelling and much more open. And they'll read a page or two to find out what happened, and then you've got them. If you had a compelling enough story that whets their appetite for more of what you're going to say. And stories are the primal, sort of communication way that you can get something across to someone that illustrates. And stories can be foreground or background. Your point can be foreground and the story can be illustrating it, or your story can just be the whole thing, and the moral is just implicit. The point you want to get across, the takeaway, is implicit because anybody going through that will come away with a different experience. You're having them experience what your takeaway is. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, that was awesome. Let me ask you this. I had a college lit professor who on the first day of class, his first rule of writing was he told everybody, if you ever write something and immediately think to yourself, wow, that is brilliant, crumple it up in a ball and throw it away.
Oh, no. He's in the Murder Your Little Darlings.
Murder Your Little Darlings. Yeah. What did he mean by that? And is there any validity in that advice?
I don't agree. I think what you need to do, and this is the biggest enemy of writing talent and writing careers, is the critical voice inside your head. I interviewed Elizabeth Gilbert of Eat, Pray, Love fame before she was famous. We interviewed her for our first book, Happy for No Reason, and her book hadn't gone big then. And she said something that really, really changed my writing life. And she said, when I write, I'm Liz the writer, and Liz the editor doesn't appear until much later. If you try and edit, if you think, oh, this is good or this is bad, you're sunk. You just write. You just get what's inside, outside, as best you can. And you get your ideas down on paper. And, Anne Lamott said, I don't know can I curse on this show?
Absolutely. The more creative swearing, the better.
Shitty first drafts. I mean, you gotta write badly. And then your editor comes back later, because if you edit as you're writing, you're in a different part of the brain. You just won't get the depth of what you have inside, because you're worried about it. You have to just slap the clay down and then take the time to scrape away what doesn't work. Get it all out. I mean, mentally, just do a mind dump, do a heart dump, put it all down. There is a caveat that if you're writing a book, then you need to have some outline so that you have some skeleton to hang this flesh on. But you start when you know what you're going to write about. You just let it all come out. So I don't agree that if you think it's good, you get rid of it. But the Murder Your Little Darlings has to do with don't be attached to scaffolding. Sometimes what you write is just a scaffolding for the building, and you get attached to it and you need an editor. You don't ever decide what's good or bad about your own writing because you're way too close to it. Every writer, if you have any money that you need to spend on your writing, is to get an editor, someone fresh to look at your work, and make sure it's an editor who's in your genre. So if you're writing creative nonfiction, don't get a journalist, because those are exactly opposite. Creative nonfiction is basically writing nonfiction in a fictional style, and it has all the elements of fiction. Journalism is the exact opposite. It's totally objective. There's no subjectivity. It's the facts, what, where, when, why, how. So, you don't want to have someone who is a journalist edit your nonfiction, literary nonfiction or creative nonfiction or narrative nonfiction. You don't want to have a fiction writer. Well, you could have a fiction writer do your, but you don't want to have a nonfiction writer do your fiction book. You really need to make sure, but having somebody else's eyes, because your whole story, your whole experience is enmeshed. You make the jumps because it's all there for you. You understand the backstory. It's like it's unconscious. It's there. But somebody who comes to your story fresh, they say, well, wait, you made a mistake here. I mean, I don't get it. Well, how does this connect to this? You supplied the connection because it's your experience. So you need to have somebody else's eyes on it. So to answer your question, Murder Your Little Darlings, you need to be open to that your darlings are scaffolding, and that the editor, and editing is very subjective, writing is very subjective. If you really feel strongly about it, then you need to have more than one editor tell you it's bad. But because you just gotta murder your little darlings. Sometimes they sound good to you. I've had people come up to me and tell me there's titles, and I look at them and I tilt my head and I go, huh? And to them it makes total sense. But that title is so above gradient, is the word I use. It's so above where your audience is. You need to build a ramp. And so your title is the most important thing in your book, because if people don't get your title, they're not going to pick up that book. If people open your book and the first page is boring, they're going to put them down. If your title and your subtitle, your title of your book, if you're a writer, I don't know if I'm talking to writers or just creative people, so I don't know, but writers, your title has to be just grab somebody's attention, and the subtitle is going to convince them to buy it. What's the benefit for them? Why should they read this book? What are they going to get from it? So that's often, people don't get that. And I tell my writers, my writing coach, I have coaching clients. I did. I'm on a sabbatical now, but I had coaching clients, and I would say to them, my writing clients, you need to imagine that someone's walking down a path, and your book title is the door. There's all these doorways, and they can go into any of these doorways. And if your doorway doesn't attract them, then you're lost. You have 30 seconds, maybe even less. They're going to read your title, and they're going to go, interesting or not interesting. And then that's it. You could spend years, your whole lifetime writing a book, but if you have a bad title and a bad cover and a bad subtitle and a bad first page, it's all for naught.
What's more challenging, writing your own ideas or editing someone else's?
Writing your own ideas. Editing is the easiest thing in the world because somebody else has done the heavy lifting. You're just polishing. I used to editing is very fun. It's if you're a woodworker, when you're sanding something and you run your hand over it, you're just making pass after pass with a sander to see how smooth you can get it, how the wood can catch the light, and there can be different ripples in it. So when I'm writing, that's where it's just wrangling and taming and handling. It's drawing up from this deep nonverbal place to put it into language. But then once it's on the page, then you get to go on and say, well, I think this needs to be like this. And editing is a joy. It's really fun. It's where you get to sort of play and be very creative. But people don't understand that you don't do those simultaneously.
I like your analogy about the woodworker and the smoothing it. And I imagine that some of the editing process is taking chunks out or using heavy-grade sandpaper.
Yep.
What kind of response do you get from writers when you tell them that they need some serious revision work? Are their feelings hurt? Or is there a lot of pushback? Is there an argument?
It depends. It depends on the person. If someone doesn't want to be edited, I usually don't work with them because they just aren't someone who really who wants to write for someone else. And I know there's like 6 reasons people write. And one reason is just catharsis. They just want to get it off their heart. They just want to get it on paper. Or they want to write for their family. Or they just, they want to tell their story. They don't care if people get it or not. The editor is the bridge between you and your reader. And so if someone, I always try to be very delicate. I don't say this is terrible. I'll say, you know what? This doesn't land the way I think you want it to. I don't think this is going to connect with a reader, and they're not going to get what you want. And I'll edit it. And you use track changes so they can see what you've taken out. Do you know that track changes feature in Microsoft Word?
Yep.
When you use that, people can see, and I usually have them read the version that doesn't have the changes so they can just feel how it feels. Because what I do, my final pass on a book, when I'm editing, is I read the whole thing out loud. I read the whole thing out loud to somebody. And you can feel the places that are still rough, that don't flow, that seem stilted. And one of my biggest processes when I was writing stories was I walked every day. I walked my dog with a girlfriend. And I would interview someone, and I would be working with their story, and I would tell her the story. And that would really help me understand. The spoken story would help me really understand what was interesting about the story and what parts I kind of went through really fast because they weren't as interesting. And so it helped me gauge which parts, were really important to include and which parts I needed to maybe include just for clarity but not elaborate on. And so telling people the story rather than just writing it will help you really see what sings in a story. And also reading out loud once you're editing will help you. It's amazing how powerful that is.
We always hear about finding your voice as an author. Does that go back to what you said about just the repetition until you get good at writing, or is finding your voice... Can you explain to everyone what that means and what the best way to go about finding it is?
That's an interesting question. I think finding one's voice means making a really perfect conduit between what's inside and bringing it outside without losing anything. And, partly what your voice will be, you'll get a clue to your voice by what you enjoy in other people's writing. Like, my favorite writers are women, and they write from a very sort of emotional place. And that's, I enjoy stories where they're very conversational, where I get to hear what someone's thinking. So your voice will often be very similar to the books that you like to read. If you're a reader. And I don't understand how a writer cannot be a reader.
I say that's the best way to learn spelling.
Yeah. So finding your voice to me is the repetition of really learning how to access your deepest insights, your deepest experiences that are more multidimensional. That sounds so abstract. Let me think how I would say that. We could talk. I remember when I was a little girl, my dad and I drove into New York City. I grew up in Long Island. And we drove into New York City, into the West Village, to see my uncle who lived in the West Village. And it was in the 60s. I'm old. And the song on the radio was from Hair, the musical Hair. I think it was Good Morning Starshine or whatever that was. And this was this amazing experience in my brain, in my experience, in my heart, that I had with my dad. My dad died very young, so it's even more powerful for me. And there's so many layers to that story. There's if I was really a good writer, which I think everybody can always get better. I think I got to a journeyman sort of level, but great writers, they may be born, but I think you can become a very good writer. I don't know if you can become a great writer if you don't have a certain sensitivity. But there's there was the sound, and there was the seeing the back of my dad's neck, and looking at the cars going by, and being in the West Village where those weird people were wearing psychedelic clothing, and there were so many different pieces, and to weave all of that. And then what is your voice about? Is your voice about talking about the action? Is it a thriller? Is it a chick flick? Movies are a really good way for you to understand how books unfold in a certain way, and sort of the different feelings that you get. Some writers are really about the action and having a great story, and some are more internal. They're about the growth a person goes through, and I tend to be the kind of person that loves the growth stories. I like a good plot, but more often I like stories of human growth and personal development, and someone becoming more loving and kind and kinder to themselves and others, and losing some of the pain and nastiness we have towards ourselves and others. So, I guess your question, I don't know if I answered it. Your voice is really, there's a voice in your head that's a true voice. There's a voice in your head that's critical, and there's a voice in your head that's fearful. But there's a voice in your head that kind of narrates your life for you. And if you can, and it may not even be in words, it's just sort of a thread that runs through all of your experiences, and it's the quality of your heart, it's the quality of your, I don't know, I'm getting kind of abstract here, so sorry.
I'm digging it.
But if you can get that into words, that's your voice. And that could take years. But it starts, it's there in seed form, it's there, and you'll be most satisfied with your writing. So your voice is just becoming the best conduit of what's deep inside of you and bringing it out. And I think it's very subjective, You may never be satisfied that you've gotten that. And I saw Elizabeth Gilbert speak, and she said, sometimes you just have to send, it's the imperfect twin. The writing is the imperfect twin of what you have inside. But sometimes you have to send it off. You just have to get it, your parenting is done, you have to send it out into the world. And that's all there is to it. You're midwifing, you've birthed it. It's never going to be the exact of what you had inside, but you just have to send it out to do its work and to do, what you meant it to do in the world.
You said that some of your favorite things to read were the transformational stuff, and that's, a lot of the books that you've co-authored were with transformational thought leaders or motivational speakers. Were you drawn to them because you already liked that stuff, or was it working with them and discovering the material that they were putting out?
Chicken or the egg?
Yeah.
I do not know. That's a good question. I mean, I when I went to see Jack Canfield, I was always a meditator, and I always thought that life wasn't just about, material existence. It wasn't. Even as a little child, I remember looking in the mirror and going, wow, people think this body is who I am. Isn't that so strange? And I always knew I was like riding in a car, that I wasn't the car, I was the driver, but that people identified with who I was by this body.
Right.
And it was a very strange and abstract thought to have as a 6-year-old, but I remember having it. So I was always a little weird that way. I wasn't someone who was going to want to go to business school and, make the best widget. I always wanted to change the world in some way and make a difference. I was raised by parents who believed in the Hebrew concept of tikkun olam, to fix the world, and that I was raised with a big social conscience. And so when I didn't know what form that was going to take, and what it ended up being was I really want to inspire and empower people to become happier in their lives and more loving to the world around them. And so it started by meeting Jack Canfield, and I realized there was just so much. The windows were so dirty in my mind. So much of what I had to give was blocked by self-doubt and self-criticism, and I loved so much of Jack's work, and that sort of turned me on to that whole personal development thing beyond just being a meditator, but actually, culturing the ability to be effective and be kind to yourself and others and believe in yourself. And, that stuff is not taught in schools. I just think we should teach this stuff in schools. And so I got really excited about that. And then it just led to Chicken Soup Stories, that led to my favorite book I ever wrote. I'll tell you, it's called, my second favorite. You've got to read this book, it's called. 55 People Tell the Story of the Book That Changed Their Life. And I got to interview people, many, many people. We ended up selecting 55 of their stories who had done amazing things in the world. And what was the book that had actually changed them, that had inspired them? And, being a book person and also being someone who cares about the world and growth, this was, right up my alley. So that book, I highly recommend it. It's by Jack Canfield and Gay Hendricks, and I was the with author on that one, which meant that I did a lot of the sort of heavy lifting with the writing, and we all worked on the book together. And it was a great, great experience. And then my second favorite book, my second two, are Happy for No Reason and Love for No Reason, because they changed me fundamentally as a person. When you write a self-help book, you have to own that material so that you can say it well enough. It's just like Einstein said, you have to understand so many different things and say it in a way that anybody can understand, and I believe conversationally. So I learned, how to become happy from the inside out, and how to love people, to live with an open heart, not just love, specific people, but come to life with, love coming from the inside out, as being a fountainhead of love and good feeling and kindness. Those are all just what life's about. And so I was really lucky. I was drawn to that, and I was lucky to work with those people and get the benefit. I remember I read a book by Gay Hendricks. He hasn't published this book, so I'm not going to say what it was yet. But I remember thinking, gosh, this is amazing, because you can really change people's lives. You can you make distinctions that they never saw before, and then it changes the way they go forward. So I hope that answers your question.
It does, and we're on a wavelength here, Carol, because you're doing a phenomenal job of preempting my questions. My next two was, which book of yours did you enjoy writing the most and why? And then it was, what are some examples of personal growth or lessons that you learned from your co-author's material just in the process of writing with them? So,
well, good. I got those done.
Yeah, you got those done. All right, personal question. There's a bunch of tales of modern authors who insist on writing on old-fashioned typewriters because the clickety-clack is hypnotic for them and it puts them in the right frame of mind that a computer just can't do. Did you have any writing quirks like that?
No, I hated computers at first. I mean, I remember I would just cry because I couldn't make them work, and things would disappear, and I couldn't save. And but I actually really enjoy cut and paste and saving as, because I can take something and just leave it over there, and then save it as a new version and try experiments and know that if it doesn't work, I still have the old version. So I am a huge fan of writing technology because it is made, and I can cut and paste, and I have two screens. That's one thing I absolutely have to have is two screens. I write with two screens, especially editing with two screens. So if I have any kind of technological quirk, it's that I could not write with one screen. I have to, and I have research up. I will be, I never write with music. I absolutely hate it. I have total silence when I write. I get distracted. I need to focus so intensely because, again, it's a white hot flame, that you are sort of melting everything and then pouring it out into a mold that you want it to be a certain shape.
What is your personal strategy for dealing with writer's block?
Just do what I said about keep your hands moving. And have a question, and just like the introduction to Happy for No Reason was really hard for me. It was just, there was so much I wanted to say, and the problem is you want to say it all at once. A book is a delivery system. You can't just download. You have to do it sequentially. Mm-hmm. If I could just take my information and just put it into your head like a CD, and then just have it be downloaded, it would be great. But it has to be a first chapter and a second chapter, and they all have to build on each other. And so it's so. That introduction was so hard, but I started just going to bed with what I call, and doing morning thoughts. Just do morning thoughts. Just start writing something. Just keep writing, and something will happen. And writer's block is usually because you are editing. So just write the worst thing you can possibly write. Don't even worry about whether it's good or not. Just write badly.
It was a dark and stormy night.
Yes, it was a dark and stormy night, and it doesn't matter, because if you are constantly editing while you're writing, that is the number one cause. I love Chris Beatty, who is the founder of NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writing Month. It's November each year. He says, cultivate exuberant imperfection.
I love that phrase.
Yep.
Exuberant imperfection.
Yep. It's fantastic. You just want to be exuberant. Just get it out, shake it off, just write, and go back later and decide what's good and what's worth keeping, and then have fun with it. If you're tortured, then you're definitely in your intellect, because the intellect is good, bad, good, bad, good, bad. It's binary, whereas your heart is going to just want to sing. It's just going to want to blab. It's just going to want to talk. And you go back later. Now, you don't want to be all heart-based, because you have to go back and say, okay, why would someone want to read this? And, does this really work? But you don't want to do those simultaneously. Again, it's the biggest key in writing is not to edit while you write.
I love what you said a few minutes ago about utilizing the two screens for your workflow, and I was wondering if there's any other ways that you've sort of harnessed the power of technology, or if there's any other tips or tools or tricks of the trade, things you utilize to make your creative process flow easier.
I do think that there's a few things. You are a human body, mm-hmm. and there's human animal and there's human spirit. I'm quoting from one of my favorite self-help authors, Alison Armstrong. If you don't know who she is, you can look her up, understandmen.com. And she talks about human animal, and human animal is the basis of human spirit. And I really know that if I didn't drink enough water, if I didn't eat properly, most people, if you're going to write, you have to have a substratum of a functioning brain. You have to have a functioning body. And some really cool thing that I found recently is that there's a supplement that I really like for coherence and for focus, because what happens is we lose focus. We're so used to, they found that basically humans have a second less attention span than goldfish at this point. Goldfish have 9 seconds and humans have 8 seconds. And that has shrunk consistently since the 1950s or 1960s. Our attention span has gotten less and less and less and less. And that's very hard when you're writing, because writing or creativity requires you to be present and to hold space and to not get distracted and to be bored, to be at a place where you're not filling yourself up with passive entertainment. So that requires a functioning, clear brain that you're firing in all cylinders. So I found this product that I really like. It's called EHT, and it's a natural supplement. And what I found about it is that it really helps with the creative process, because it actually helps your synapses stay intact. And synapses are those places that when I'm word handling and sentence taming and concept wrangling, and when I'm flowing, when I'm taking that, those synapses are what are going to take the inner and lay down cable. That cable needs to be intact from the non-verbal to the verbal. So I am a big fan of this supplement. And there's nothing else like it. It was discovered at Princeton University, and it's a bioscience company has been researching it for a long time, and it's a fantastic discovery. I think I recommend it highly if you're a musician, if you're anybody, but if you're a creative person especially, I think your brain is a substratum, your brain and heart connection.
Yeah, I had a friend that was taking it and recommended it, and I started taking it, and I believe it was like within a week or two was when we cooked up the idea for this whole Live to Create platform that we're doing.
Cool. Well, I absolutely think that, one of the big future emphasis on health is going to be brain health, because we're living so long, but we don't want to live that long if we don't have the cognition, the cognitive health, and the focus and the quality of life. And so I'm excited, because not only does it seem to help, it took longer for it to work for me, in terms of I noticed things within 2 weeks, 3 weeks, but I've been taking it over a year now, and I really love it.
Well, we'll have to make that available to our listeners if they're interested in focus and expanding their creativity.
Cool. Yeah, they should definitely check it out.
All right. Final list of questions here.
Okay, let's do it.
And this first one, I know that you're on a sabbatical for writing, so take this as the writer. If your job as a writer only paid the bills and not a penny more, would you have still continued to do it?
Yes, but not at the level I was doing it. It was too many hours a day. Yes, I would always write because writing is a way for me to communicate with the world, to actually communicate with myself, to clarify my own thinking.
What talent or skill do you not have that you wish you did?
I wish I could juggle.
Fill in the blank. I am a success if I
grow.
And I'm a failure if I
quit.
What's the single best piece of advice you followed to get where you are today?
To go through being bad until I was good. To persist. To be determined and kind to myself. You definitely have to just go through the learning curve and be patient, because if you quit too soon, you're depriving yourself and the world of your gift.
What was the best piece of well-intentioned advice someone gave you that you're glad you ignored to get where you are today?
Follow your bliss. And I guess what I mean by that is I think you do need to follow your bliss on a general way, but perfecting a craft is not bliss. It can be difficult, and people stop. They think this thing, if it's not blissful, they should stop because it means it's not right for them. It's the most ridiculous misunderstanding in the world. True bliss comes from it's short-term satisfaction versus long-term gain. It does feel good to quit when you're going through a hard patch. So when people say follow your bliss, I'm like, yeah, on the long term, but in the short term, you need to do what it takes.
What character trait do you like best about yourself?
My curiosity and friendliness.
And what character trait do you like least about yourself?
My feelings of getting overwhelmed when it gets hard. When the going gets hard, I get kind of whiny and want to quit.
Fill in the blank. I believe every child should have the opportunity to
be loved.
If you could suggest one piece of self-improvement that everyone on Earth would adopt, what would it be?
Be kind to yourself and others.
If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
I want to fly.
Fly. Absolutely. If you could have dinner with anyone alive or dead, who would it be?
Man, that question, I never know what to say to that question. Hold on a sec. I never know.
If you get it wrong, you're going to fall in the dunk tank.
I know. The problem is, it's just that I don't know. I guess I would really like to have dinner with Albert Einstein.
That would be, I think, high on a lot of people's lists.
Yeah, I think it would be really interesting to find out what it was like to think on such a different level. And yet he was very balanced.
An hospitable nearby planet has been discovered, and you've been recruited to help colonize it. All your needs are going to be taken care of, and you can take any 3 personal or luxury items with you that you wish. What are they?
My blender. Does that count, or is that already gotten there?
Oh, no, that counts.
My blender, my dog, and my husband.
All right. The dog, husband, and the blender. And I'm going to tell the husband that the blender got listed first in that list.
Well, I was thinking of items, and then I thought, well, I can't go anywhere without these people, so.
All right, last one. You've just won a Lifetime Achievement Award, and we want to hear your acceptance speech. That's all the thank yous, the people that helped you get to where you are. There's no time limit, so you can get to all of them that you need. And if there's any personal cause that you want to champion, this is your soapbox, so let her rip.
Oh, my goodness. How many days do you have? I would have to thank so many people. I mean, truly, I want to thank my parents for instilling the gift of creativity and making me feel like I was loved and cared about, and that what I did was important. I want to thank my mentors and the people who gave, Jack Canfield and Marci Shimoff and Gay Hendricks, all the people I've worked with, for allowing me to work with them and take their knowledge and supplement it with my gift and, create something that could help anybody in the world live better lives and be happier. And I want to thank my meditation teachers and the people who've given me the ability to live a life that's not superficial but has such depth. And my personal cause is I really want people to live and let live. This planet is, we're all on this one planet. I'm going to start a foundation called All Life Matters, and ALM, and I want to give alms for alm, because every single bit, everybody is as important as everybody else, and the animals on this planet deserve our respect, the plants on this planet deserve our respect. There has to be a place where we can live and let live, and that comes from a sort of internal recognition of the humanity and the being and the spirit in every single thing that we find ourselves with. And if you can feel that kinship. So I'm so impassioned about helping people be kind to themselves, because that's the first step in acknowledging the spirit inside yourself, that you could see it around you and start seeing. They say that meditation is seeing the spirit inside of you that's worth respect and is beautiful everywhere else. And kindness to yourself and others is, if everyone was kind to themselves and others, the world would be a very different place.
How long do you meditate for each day? You said you do it twice a day?
Well, I started 20 minutes twice a day when I was 15, and now I have a longer meditation program. I meditate for about an hour in the morning and about 25 minutes in the afternoon. I get up early so I can meditate before I turn on my phone or start reacting to the demands of the day, and it's the most beautiful, quiet time. I just have this great period of time where I can just be very silent and anchor to something that's not changing, that's not chaotic, that's not reactive.
Conscientious prioritization of your day.
Yeah. Well, I don't think in that time. I go beyond thought. Then I come out of that dripping wet with all that sort of great being. And then I start conscientiously organizing my day. And then I open the floodgates to emails, texts, and the computer. Because if you start your day responding, you'll spend the whole day putting out fires and never get done what you want to get done. Ever.
Well, I think that was some amazingly incredible, insightful advice and teachings. And thank you so much for taking the time to share that with us.
Well, that was my pleasure.
And I know you got a ton to do, so I will let you get to it. Thank you so much for joining us, and I will talk to you soon.
Yeah, I'm coming to Nashville in October, so I hope to see you then.
Cool. That would be great.
All right. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Once again, that was #1 New York Times bestselling author Carol Kline. I'd like to thank everyone for joining me today. You are listening to the Live to Create podcast, and this is Shane Almgren reminding you to dream big, be inspired, and live creatively.